So you're hanging out there in the Virgin Islands where everybody thinks it's just you're on the beach, drinking, smoking. Smoking ganja and drinking Mai Tais all day long. That's the wrong thing to say on this show.
That's
But
pretty close to reality.
But now, somewhere along the line, you got the bug to be an undercover, a certified, trained FBI undercover agent, correct?
That is correct.
What the heck is wrong with you, woman?
Well, it's kind of funny. It stems back to when I was assigned to Mobile, and DEA didn't have any women, and FBI only had a couple at the time. So DEA calls over to FBI and says, "Hey, do you guys got any women?" And they said, "We need a female undercover." And of course, they called my supervisor who had the undercover program, and he says, "Well, we only got one. Let me go see." So he comes to me and he says, "Hey, you want to do an undercover for DEA?" I said, "Sure." Yeah. I mean, I didn't even ask what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I go over there and they had a doctor who was trading prescription for sex, which is why, of course, a male couldn't do it.
Okay.
So I did this undercover, and it was, I had SAC approval because I hadn't been through the undercover school yet. So you have to go through the school to do full time and in big cases, but they could give you authority to do cases one-on-one. So he approved me to do it, and I go over there, and it was so easy. The guy gets out of his car in his scrubs with his prescription pad in his hand and trots over to my car, and he just starts going off at the mouth. I couldn't even get any words in. He was just talking about, well, what do you want? What can I get you? And what are you going to do for me? And all this kind of stuff. And he's just talking. And I look in on my rearview mirror, and my backup team, of course, for all the agents were back there. I could see the car shaking because they were laughing so hard that this little car was just shaking. And I thought, okay, well, I think I'm doing this right. And so I had several meets with this guy, and I thought, well, undercover stuff is the easiest stuff in the world. I mean, maybe I should just do this.
Yeah.
And so at the time, my supervisor, he was in charge of the undercover. He says, "You might be a natural. Maybe we should send you to school." And I only had about 5 years on at that point. I said, "Do you think I've got enough years? Maybe I need a little bit more, seasoning before I go to undercover school and all that." And so I didn't actually go to undercover school until I got down to the Virgin Islands. So I get down to the Virgin Islands, and then my supervisor called and said, "Hey, something came across my desk that I think you'd be perfect for." Now, that should have been my first clue to run. He says, "They're looking for an undercover agent to work in the extremist world that could kind of live in a commune, be a vegan, kind of hippie, and you were just hippie enough to pull this thing off." I said, "What's a vegan?" And he started laughing. He said, "How would you feel about doing an undercover assignment, more of a full-time thing?" And of course, I still don't know what I'm getting into. I said, "Sure, yeah." I don't even know about undercover school. I don't know. I've got to go through 2 weeks of hell to get through this because they don't tell me anything like that. So I got approved for the case. And then they said, "Oh, yeah, now you're going to undercover school." And so off I went. And undercover school in the FBI is secretive. They don't give you any clues about it until you get up there and you find out. Yeah. But I survived, and only about 50% of the people that go survive. So I survived undercover school, and then went off to California to do my first undercover full-time mission. And I have no idea what I'm up for. They said, "Well, how long do you think you'll be gone?" I said, "Well, I guess it depends on if I'm any good at this or not. I could be gone 2 or 3 weeks. I could be gone 2 or 3 months." And it amounted to, I came back 4 years later. So I was pretty good at it, I guess.
Whoa.
But I'm a female. I'm a smaller female. I just don't look as suspicious as some muscle-bound dude walking in.
Yeah. Well, and I want to back up there just to the undercover school, because I read the second of Dana's books here. It's the Lexi Montgomery series. I read the one Beyond the Cabin. Mm-hmm. And in there you talk about going through the FBI undercover school, and they've got you in a hotel and they basically kidnap you. Did that really happen?
Yeah. Well, the scenarios are so realistic and you're sleep deprived at this point because you're really getting no sleep whatsoever. You're averaging about an hour and a half, 2 hours of sleep. So you're sleep deprived. So the scenarios seem so realistic that you actually do kind of forget that you're in training, and it's rough. I mean, you get beat up and and slammed down, and It's the wild, wild west because they want to make sure that you really can handle undercover life and being tired and exhausted and being able to think on your feet and not just giving it up and saying, oh, hell, I'm an FBI agent. Don't shoot me, please. So yeah, the scenarios are very realistic. You get grabbed, you get thrown. I got thrown in the trunk. All that was true. And I landed
Mm-hmm.
on a jack and I
Oh,
was bruised. The whole side of my leg was bruised, but I didn't even tell anybody because I was just determined I was getting through this training. And so I went home and the guys on my squad were like, good God, what did they do to you? You look like you've been beat to death. You're all purple. I said, well, I got thrown into the back of a trunk and I ended up landing on a jack. No, if they're going to throw you in the back of the trunk, they should make sure there's nothing in there for you to land on at least.
especially in a training scenario. Yeah,
Yeah. So no,
that's
all of that really actually happened. The
wow.
scenario that I put in the book actually really happened. I thought I was going to get all heat with the undercover school, but luckily it'd been so many years that they didn't use that scenario anymore. So they were okay with me like divulging it, I guess. But
Yeah, yeah. It's. I think we've probably come to a conclusion here that you're not a quitter.
no, no,
That you're not going to let anybody beat you.
no.
And
I'm
and
determined.
and I'm talking out of school here because I did, as I mentioned during our pre-call, that I've done undercover, but just little things where I might go for an hour meeting or a 2 hour meeting, and then I might not see the bad guy for weeks. We communicate on phone or text or email, whatever. Um, I don't think I don't. It's not that I don't think I know I'm not cut out to do what you did. That's I mean that is a true sacrifice.
Well, it is, and that's the stuff I think that doesn't come across on the television and movies. Is it's not the danger sometimes as much as the psychological impact. I mean, when you're doing full time stuff, you can't call your mom, you can't call your best friend, you can't call your boyfriend. You're truly alone. The only
Mm-hmm.
people that you have contact with is your contact agent, your handler, and that's it. That's the only person you have contact with is your handler, and that's rare. I mean, when I did my first undercover case, my contact agent was very well known in the animal liberation, Earth Liberation Front movement. So they knew him as a cop. So when I would meet him, I would have to go like 45 minutes or an hour outside of town to just meet with them. It's because we couldn't be seen in town. So yeah, it's psychologically more of a toll even than the stuff. And I don't even pretend that I did the cases like Joe Pistone did, and Joe and Jack and those guys. They were dealing with the mafia and they were dealing with people who would kill them on the spot. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have that kind of people that I was dealing with, but I had a different kind. I had the people that were nice and fun to be around and you liked and you developed a real friendship with some of these people because they
Mm-hmm.
weren't nasty drug dealers. They weren't mafia people. They were educated. They had a lot of the same interests that you have. And so it was easy to like them, which sometimes I think is a little bit harder because you have to really keep yourself in check. You can't let yourself start to slide down that slippery slope of,
Yep.
well, maybe they're not so bad.
Yeah, it's and we'll get into that a little bit more because I know in the book you repeat several times about you develop relationship with people so that you can betray those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Build
and that's I mean
relationship.
that explains undercover work there in just one concise sentence. Quite
Yep.
honestly.
Build relationships to betray relationships. And
Yep.
betrayal is ugly no matter what. Even if it's a bad guy, it's an ugly
Mm-hmm.
word. It makes you feel bad inside. Even if you know you're doing your job, you still kind of feel tore up inside.
Yep. It's funny too. I mean, whether undercover or defendants in a regular case that you investigate, and a lot of times when you go to arrest them, there's that betrayal there. There's that animosity between each other because this is good versus evil. But then down the road, as they maybe, I don't know if you call it, come to see the light or realize the error of their ways or however you want to phrase that, you actually develop a relationship. Now, are we going to be best friends? Yeah, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
But we can certainly, how's your family doing? How are your kids? Are they in school? Are you staying straight? You show concern for each other.
Right.
So,
Right.
and that's just on a regular case. When you're living with these folks for 4 years, Lord, I can't imagine the toll that takes on you mentally. But I don't want to jump to that part yet. I want to hold that off for just a little bit longer. when you mentioned the Earth Liberation Front, now I thought that was something you made up in the book because the initials are ELF.
Yeah,
And what
but it's not. That's a real Earth Liberation Front, Animal Liberation Front. They're actual real movements.
and
And
what's their focus and purpose?
well, the Earth Liberation Front is usually anybody infringing on the environment. So a lot of the people that you see that are spiking the trees and taking out the cell towers, or like maybe burning down a new housing development area, that's usually ELF, because they're anything that infringes on the earth. Animal rights people are the ALF. They're kind of more with the animals, fur industry, factory farming, laboratory testing, anything that involves animals. Now, there's a big cross pollination between the two because, of course, most of the animal people are all usually vegan. And so the Earth Liberation people are usually vegan too because of the impact on our planet from factory farming and things like that. So there is a crossover between the two.
Hmm. Well, and now that other acronym comes out to ALF, and everybody remembers the old TV show ALF.
I know. And that's funny because they get very offended if you call it ALF. It's ALF. And so that was one of the first things I learned is don't ever say ALF.
I just thought it was all made up, but
No, I know. But they're real.
It's not a tough guy name, is it?
No, it's
so now you're going from Virgin Islands to California, is that right?
Northern California the first time.
And you're working are you working out of the Sacramento office or
out of Sacramento? Yes, but I never go to the office.
yeah. But how did you get an introduction into this group?
Well, it's funny
and please don't give away any undercover techniques, but I think a lot of what we're going to talk about is pretty well known.
Yeah. I get there and I said, well, do you have any sources in, human sources? And they're like, no, because this group is really hard to infiltrate because they will not roll on each other. Even if they're facing 20 years, they won't roll on each other. I mean, it's very hard to get one of those guys to cooperate. So they had no cooperators. And I said, well, any idea how I'm going to get in? And they're just kind of all looking at me like, well, you're the undercover. So I was like, great. So I did a cold bump. Basically, I just went and started hanging out places where vegans hang out, the different coffee shops, the vegan restaurants and things like that. And started kind of looking for, I'd seen pictures of the targets from my handler. And I just started trying to kind of end up places where they would see me a lot. And I told them from the start, I said, well, since you don't have anybody, don't expect anything fast because I'm not going to go in there and do this. This is not going to be anything quick. And they said, you have all our support. It doesn't matter how long it takes. Just do what you need to do. So I started just kind of, that was it. I hung out in places where they hung out. And I kind of got lucky because one of the people that I started kind of doing some above ground protests, they weren't doing anything illegal whatsoever. But I met a couple of people and they're like, oh, well, I've got a friend that, needs some volunteers and I can introduce you. And so, okay. And so sure enough, it was with one of our targets. So I was like, this is perfect. So of course they're scratching their head in Sacramento going, oh my God, you're like, great. I wasn't a great undercover. It was dumb luck. It was just dumb luck, but of course I took full credit of that, I am the great undercover. But it wasn't. It was just luck. It was being in the right place at the right time, talking to the right person who happened to know this person, who happened to know this person. And what really should have taken a really long time to do was like pretty much fast tracked because of just meeting the right person at the right time. So
I think you're being humble here too, and quite honestly, I don't believe in luck and coincidence. I think you earned it. And so you're just being humble, and I appreciate that. But I don't want to downplay the risk that you took and the successes that you had in this. So
well, it was a lot of hours of sitting with nothing happening. I will give you that much too. I mean, it's just perseverance. It's, if something doesn't happen in 6 hours, well, you stay 2 more hours or 3 more hours or 4 more hours, you're just going to see it through one way or the other. And then you have to think outside the box. Well, that didn't work. What am I going to do now? Where else am I going to go? And who am I going to, and the good thing about the Bureau, I guess, was they left me alone for the most part to do whatever I needed to do. And I had approval from the prosecutor to commit minor crimes if I needed to. I couldn't build an incendiary device by any, means, but, I could do like small vandalism type stuff to fit in with the group and things like that. So I kind of knew, my boundaries.
Mm-hmm. And that's extremely important to know because without that authorization, you're committing criminal acts.
Right. Well, and the scary thing about that is this group is so secretive that you might get a phone call in the middle of the night that says, hey, meet us out front. And you go hop in the car. You don't know, are we going to party? Are we going to drink? Are we going to, or is there going to be a gas can in the back of the seat with you? Are we going to go burn something down? Which I did not have authority to do that. And it's like, how am I going to contact my contact agent to let him know this is going down? I mean, so that kind of stuff was always going through your head. Is this going to be the time they pick me up and we're going to do something, illegal? And if we're going to go spray paint signs, that's fine. Or we're going to glue locks, or we're going to break a window, that's fine. But if we're going to burn something down, I've got to find a way to contact the FBI. Mm-hmm. So yeah, mentally, it was always something going through your head.
Oh. So how many times did you get that call in the middle of the night to come out?
Several times, probably the first time around, maybe 3 or 4. And one time it was to go down, they picked me up and we went down to the Bay Area. And I was like, oh, this is going to be it. This is going to be it. Oh, this is going to be it. We're going to have to figure out how to get in touch with somebody on this. Because I thought the hotbed, we were going to San Francisco. I thought something's going down tonight. Well, it turned out it was a big gathering. And they had the movies going with all kinds of the propaganda films with the ALF burning down things and fires everywhere. It was just a big rally to get people pumped up and heated up. And what happened was everybody left there and went out and did criminal activity. But I was kind of lucky. Our people just kind of was down there kind of starting shit. And then we came back and really didn't do anything. So I was like, okay, well, that turned out good, but that could have gone bad. But of course I made the phone call and said, hey, everybody better be watching it tonight. Stuff's going to happen all over the place. And I would watch the Bay Area pretty close.
So when you're going out to these meetings, I know the answer to this. How close is your backup?
I usually had no backup. Yeah. Because they could spot a tail. They were smart. These people were really smart. They could spot a tail. My contact agent discussed that with me. They said, how comfortable do you feel being out there with just one person maybe, or no people? And I said, I'd rather be out there with no people than somebody get burned on a surveillance. And, at first they were really leery and didn't want to do that. So my backup might be 20 minutes away. But then as I got more comfortable in the role and they accepted me into the group more, then my backup was nobody, basically. It was a phone call to my saying, I'm going out. This is where I think I'm going to be. I'll call you when I get back. And that was pretty much the extent of it.
Are you wearing recording devices?
I am. Yeah, I'm wearing. I didn't at first, just in case they did any, because they do the hug thing where they're like, oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And they hug you. Well, what they're doing is patting you down. They're filling for wires and things like that. So at first I didn't, but then after they were more comfortable with me, I started wearing a wire. And my undercover apartment was all wired for sound and video too. So anytime somebody wanted to come over, I was never going to tell them no, of course. That was easy. That was one switch. So that was an easy situation.
Did you carry a weapon with you?
No, they asked me that. And I thought I would have a whole lot more trouble explaining why I had a gun, especially with this group, than why I didn't have a gun. So I chose not to. And then even when I did my my quick hits, my cases away from the undercover, the full-time stuff that I was doing before, where I was going in and buying drugs or selling drugs, depending on what the scenario was, I chose not to wear one then too, even though that made me more nervous to not have a gun when I'm doing a drug deal. But the same situation, I thought if they find a gun on me, I'm going to escalate the situation a whole lot more versus being able to just talk my way out of a situation. So I never wore a gun in undercover work. And that was my decision because the Bureau always gave me the option, but I always chose not to. I just felt like it was going to either escalate things or be preposterous with this group. I mean, these people didn't run around with guns.
Yeah.
Yeah, they burned things down and blew things up, but they didn't wear guns.
Were they involved in any murders?
Not that I know of, no. I would think in their situation, it's a situation somebody would get killed by accident. I know when they had that big fire down in San Diego, that ELF was responsible for. There was a security guy who barely escaped. They didn't realize he was in there. He was a night security guy that had slept in the place, and he barely escaped with his life. He went out a window, and he could have easily been a casualty. But as far as the United States, not that I know of, I don't know of any murders in the States.
How big is this particular group, either the animals or the ecological group, and what is their reach? Are they confined to a geographical area, or are they around the world?
They're definitely around the world. In fact, they started in England, so and then blood over here from England, but they're all over the world. And in fact, my partner and I ended up going over to the Netherlands to attend the gathering, and we went with American Targets over there, and so we met activists from all over the world. Finland, Germany, the Stanley countries, just everywhere. So it's basically in every country for the most part. Now in the United States, it's mostly on the West Coast. The hotbed is pretty much California, Oregon, all up and down there, Portland and the Bay Area of California being big hotbeds, but then also down in LA and things like that. So it's pretty much a West Coast thing. They have had incidents in other parts of the country, I think around Chicago and things like that, but it's more or less on the West Coast, and it kind of ebbs and flows. It was really big, like in the early 2000s, and basically when I was doing the undercover stuff, it was really big. But then a few people go to jail, and they have that Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act where you can get charged with basically 20-year hit with this, and it's a federal charge. And so that really, I think, tamped down a lot of the extremist movements. And I think they're still around, but I don't think they're around in the force that they used to be. Now, that doesn't mean something could set them off, next month and they're back, because, I think they're always around. I just don't think they're doing as many actions as they used to do.
Where do they get their funding to do their activities?
Well, that's kind of interesting. When we were under, there was a couple, and he was a doctor. He was a doctor, and he was supplying some of the money that they needed, because a lot of these people live in like crash houses and dumpster dive for food. And I mean, these are college educated people. A lot of these are college educated people that choose to live like this. So you always had to be careful when you went to a potluck, because some of that stuff is probably going to come out of the dumpster. I told my case agent, I said, I will not dumpster dive. I'll do a lot of things for this job, but I am not digging food out of a dumpster for you. He thought it was funny. Anyway. Yeah, he thought it was funny. Yeah. So, I mean, they actually post schedules, like where the dumpsters, who's dumping what, like some of the restaurants dump on this night in this dumpster, so they know where the better food is. Oh. Yeah, and grocery stores.
So a lot of these people don't even have any kind of job.
No, they live off the grid completely. They don't have credit cards. They don't want to be on the grid. So they don't. You can't trace them down they're not renting apartments and things like that. And the ones that do have money take care of the ones who don't have money. That's kind of the way it works.
So we're recording this during the Olympics over in Paris, France right now. And we saw there before opening ceremonies that the French high-speed railroad system was vandalized. Do you think this group could have had anything to do with that?
Oh, it's a possibility. Yeah, because that's right up their alley. All those people moving in, the impact on the environment. Could be. It could very well be. Usually they like to leave a calling card, though. So they'll usually spray paint ELF was here, or ALF was here. So I doubt that it was ALF, because there's really no animals harmed in the Olympics, but ELF could very well have had a part in that.
Wow. You ended up being 4 years undercover with these folks?
4 years. Yeah. And it was one of those situations where we didn't really, I was mostly intel early on. So I was just there for intel purposes for the most part. And then they wanted to move the money over pretty much from domestic terrorism to international terrorism. So basically overnight they said, okay, great job. Thank you very much. Bye. So
Bureau did.
Yeah, the Bureau did. So I was like, are you kidding me? But they were done. when they're done, they're done. And once you have no approval, you have no approval. You can't talk to anybody. You can't do any kind of exit strategy. I mean, you're done. You're just like overnight. They say, pack your bags and go, and don't talk to any of the targets. So it's like, this is just stupid. So I did. I went back to the Virgin Islands, and that's where I met Bill, who became my boyfriend, who's now my husband. But then after I'd been there and we were dating and the relationship was getting very serious, that's when the phone call came that said, hey, look, we're having some problems down in LA, and we need you to come back as an undercover. I said, for what? They said, well, you're the expert. I said, the expert in what? And they said, what, the extremist undercover stuff. And I said, I've worked one case. And they said, well, that's one case more than any other undercover. So you need to come back. And I said, I don't want to come back. That's a long, 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 journey from the Virgin Islands to LA. And they said, well, you come consult. And so I flew out there to look at their case and see what they had going. And I noticed it called for 2 undercovers. So I said, who's your other full time? Because I'd worked all by myself the first time around. So I thought this is kind of interesting to have a second person. I just said, who's your second? And they said, we don't have anybody. I said, well, this is interesting.
Oh, I know somebody.
I said, I have somebody, and he's undercover certified. He's done a lot of undercover work. He hasn't done in this realm of, undercover, but he's worked other undercover. So he's he can do it. How would you feel about doing that? And so, of course, a few of the people were like, oh, that's a great idea. That is wonderful. You'll be so natural. And then, of course, management's like, that's a terrible idea. You'll kill each other. You can't do 24/7. You'll kill each other. You're romantically involved. The first fight you have, you'll kill each other. And so I said, well, I'm going back to the Virgin Islands, and good luck with the case. And so they're like, well, we need you. And I said, well, this is what I want, and they agreed to do it finally. And they said, okay, you're going to sign a contract that says if your relationship ends, it's not the FBI's fault, and you'll stay and work the case, and we'll transfer him wherever we need him. And so really Bill was taking the bigger, risk. So I go back and say, hey, babe, how would you feel about moving to California and like becoming a vegan? And I thought he was going to tell me to pound sand, because this guy's like worked bank robberies and, all the kind of the macho crimes in the Bureau. And he looks at me and he goes, it sounds like a good time. Let's do it. So
Good for him.
So we go out there, and he has to learn this whole thing that I've been living for 4 years. And I'm giving him a crash course on becoming a vegan. And no, we don't go to Starbucks because that's corporate owned, and we stay away from corporate names. And we go to the mom and pop places, and no, you can't wear that Gap sweatshirt. It's like, and no, you got to get rid of those leather shoes. So, I mean, it was a crash course for him, but we go undercover. And we start having just, a great time, and it works out perfect. And once again, we're there for like 3 years, and
wow,
we're living this life. And they always tell you when you're an undercover to know your legend, and your legend is your background, your dad's name, your mom's name, how many brothers and sisters you have, all that. And I always had this weird thing where I would get in the shower every morning and I would go through my legend, and that's what I would do. Okay, my undercover name is, my undercover date of birth is, my social security number is. And I went through my entire legend every single day in the shower. That was just what I did. And Bill and I had been undercover for probably 2 years and no suspicions at all. And one night in the middle of the night, our targets came knocking on the door, and they just knocked on, and we opened up the door, and they're like, hey, I think I left my sunglasses here. Well, what they were doing was checking to see if we were really who we were, and if we really lived in, because the FBI was kind of notorious for renting apartments for undercovers, and the undercovers didn't want to stay there. They'd go stay at their family's house or whatever. So they were checking to see if we really were who we were. Well, it was great, because Bill goes to the door in his underwear, and I'm back there going, who is it? So they barge in the middle of the night, and I'm like, I haven't seen any sunglasses, but come on in, sit down. They grilled us on our legend, and it was 2 years into this. And
wow,
they were doing it because they were about to invite us to go overseas with them, but they wanted to make sure we really were. And they had a private investigator that had looked into our backgrounds. And luckily, the FBI is good at one thing, and that's backstopping. And they had us properly backstopped. So everything made sense, and it looked like we had lived all these different places and worked these different places where we worked. So we checked out by their PI. And so this was their last step before they were going to take us more into the fold. And
Oh,
so,
man, these are serious people.
well, yeah. And in that undercover school, I always tell them, because I go back as a role player when I was still with the Bureau, and I always tell them, don't ever forget your legend is, you need to know your legend more than your real life, more.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of times I signed official government documents with my undercover name. And I was like, okay, well, better that way than the other way. So
Yeah.
it would make the case agent mad because he'd have to go reprint the paperwork. But, it's like, hey, that's your problem. But yeah,
In your first undercover assignment working out of Sacramento, was there a prosecution package that came out of that before they told you you're done?
no, no,
So,
which was why I could keep all my alias the same because
mm-hmm.
nothing ever happened. My identity was never disclosed. So when I went to LA later, I went as that same undercover persona, which was good because all of these groups, they operate in cells just like the IT guys do. They operate in cells. It's a need to know basis. And this cell doesn't need to know what this cell's doing, but they all know each other. And that would have been a real problem. I couldn't have gone to LA because the people in Northern California knew I was down in LA. So there had to be a
Mm-hmm.
reason why I was down in LA. So yeah, I came up with the story that this is my boyfriend. And the whole time I was in Northern California, I talked about my boyfriend who lived in Florida and all this kind of stuff. So the boyfriend finally did show up on the scene and then moved to California with me. And that was the thing. We moved to LA together. So
Wow.
yeah, there's so much that goes into it, but that's our identities were disclosed. And that's how it was disclosed. Was a Freedom of Information Act was filed by an attorney who did I think about 200 activists. And the case in Northern California that was technically closed, they released that information. Well, a couple of the people, it was single source information. And the one in particular knew exactly who had provided the information because I was the only person that had access to it. And she was the one that picked up the phone and said, hey, I don't know if she's FBI or snitch, cop. I don't know what she is, but she's something. And she's down there in LA with you people now. And so we were outed. And they did a safety transfer from California to Florida. Nothing happens overnight in the FBI unless you don't want it to. And I did not want to leave California. I loved California.
Yeah.
And yeah, then we went to Orlando, Florida. So, yeah.
So the people in the FOIA section didn't think that was something that you would redact?
Well, you got to figure these are probably young GS6s, GS9s, I don't know, that really don't have a background. They just look and say, oh, that case is closed. So they don't realize, I don't think, unless you were in this world, I don't guess you would really realize that these are all connected. And
that's just unthinkable.
I know. It's just some poor clerk that just gave out the information, didn't know any better. Can't really blame them, but still, I can blame the FBI. I can't really blame the clerk because, somebody should have had enough foresight to look and say, maybe we need to look at all of this as one and not like separate cases. But so that information was blown. Our covers were blown.
Or even not even divulge any information of a UC involvement.
Yeah, you would think. They go to so much trouble to keep your identity secret using numbers, and that's fine unless it's single source information, and then that person's going to put that number with that face, and that's what happened.
Yeah. Well, do they not? I think in DEA they route FOIA requests through Chief Counsel's office, the DEA attorneys, before they release it back out to whoever's made the request. Did they not? I guess they didn't do that in the Bureau.
I don't guess they did. Because we were the last ones to find out. We found out actually after we realized something wasn't right. We started getting the cold shoulder, and then we started getting people confronting us, and it was turning ugly. And we were like, this is not a good situation, and we need out.
Yeah.
So we got out of that situation pretty quick and went back and was like, what the heck has happened? And it took them a while. It took one of our analysts a while to realize what had happened. And they're like, oh, your identities were disclosed.
Holy cow.
Well, and that wasn't the first time something weird had happened, too. I guess it was the case in LA. One squad didn't know what the other squad was doing. And a squad that was working one of our targets put a tracker on the guy's car. Now, we had just met these people. And then he finds a tracker on his car. Oh. And that was when Bill was with me. He was like, oh, my gosh, you got to be kidding. The guy we just meet, we're just getting to be friends with, finds a tracker, who's he going to think put that car on his car? Of course, the new people.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I really don't know how we got out of that one. Without, more pressure, but we helped
and
him destroy it.
that was deconfliction in law enforcement is one of the most important things that there is to avoid situations like this, but it's one that you fight on a daily basis because this is my case, biggest case in the world. This is my career case, and I'm not telling anybody about it.
Yeah. And I could
And then you run
understand
into
that if it was another agency, even, or the locals, it was another FBI squad.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
2 squads in the same building working, and they had no idea. I was pretty livid on that one. I don't get mad easy, but boy, when I do, I was blowing a top on that one because that's your life.
Yeah.
That's your safety.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What was the focus of the LA investigation?
The same group, the Animal Liberation Front, the group in LA they were doing a lot of, they'd broken into the UCLA lab, destroyed millions of dollars worth of equipment, the animal testing stuff. There was a vivisectionist at the time. It was on 60 Minutes. That was like saying things like, well, if we put a bullet in the head of every vivisectionist, we'd save millions of animals. I mean, he went on 60 Minutes and did that. So, of course, the FBI was like, oh, this is somebody we need to keep a close eye on. He might be off his rails. So LA was a hotbed at the time. And so once again, we were put under for kind of intelligence, but that case, they did say we would like some criminal activity. If you can get involved in criminal activity, we'll bring criminal charges. So that was that. And then it ended because of the fact that, our identities were disclosed and all that kind of stuff. And they had to leave.
Well, you mentioned that they were talking about taking you overseas. What was that all about?
That was a training camp. When you hear the terms training camp, in the FBI, DEA, any federal agency, it is not summer training camp. You know what it is. So it was the gathering it was a group of animal rights people from all over the world. But what they were doing is a training camp. You learned recon, you learned how to build incendiary devices. You learned basically everything you needed to know to become an underground movement in whatever country you're going back to. And so you'd never get away with that in the United States. They would have somebody in on that. But overseas, it was really hard. In fact, it was in the Netherlands. And it was kind of funny. We couldn't get there because some of our people were kind of on no watch list and watch list. So we flew through Ireland, and then we ended up taking a flight over. So we spent a couple of days in Ireland with no boots on the ground. We had no backup whatsoever in Ireland. So we're just like, let's just pray we don't end up in Northern Ireland in some crazy situation. But we didn't. Luckily, we just were making a stopover, spending a few days there, and then we ended up in the Netherlands. But we had no idea who we were meeting. We had because they wouldn't tell us. That was it. We were along for the ride, but they wouldn't tell us. We weren't, I guess we weren't trusted enough that they could divulge that stuff ahead of time. So we knew we had to take tents. We had to take all camping gear, and we were going to be in a camp, and that was it. And sure enough, when we got to the Netherlands, a big bus picked a bunch of us up and took us, I think, a couple of hours outside of Amsterdam. And we were in an anarchist camp, and all living in tents. It was a lot of young people. So the partying and the drugs, and it was crazy. Somebody was throwing up outside of our tent every night. You talk about, that's where the undercover training came in, because you talk about no sleep. We were getting no sleep whatsoever. And so I was like, now I understand why they did that to us for those 2 weeks. But it was brutal. And we did, And so then to come back and find out the case was going to have to be closed. It wasn't very long after we came back. But when we flew to the Netherlands, the Dutch police wanted to debrief us going in and then debrief us coming out, because they didn't have anybody under. And I said, we put our foot down going in. We said, no, we cannot separate from our targets. We have to stay with our targets the whole time. And I didn't want to stay. I wanted to go back to the United States with them. But the Dutch kind of put their foot down and said, we really need a debrief. I said, well, we'll come up with an excuse at the end, but we're not doing it at the beginning too. That was, in hindsight, a big red flag. We should have stuck to our guns. We should have flown back to the United States with our people. And then if we had to, fly back to Amsterdam a few days later. But we separated from them. We said, hey, man, we want to hang out in the coffee shops. We want to have a little romantic time. So that's how we told them we weren't going back to the United States. And we kind of sprung it on them last minute. We're all going back to, they think we're going back to the airport, and we're actually not. So I think that was kind of a big red flag. But we're like, we're just sticking around. We want to see Amsterdam. And then we got on a train and went to Den Haag to be debriefed. Now, we haven't seen what we looked like at this point. And we go into this beautiful, fancy hotel in Den Haag, and we get in the elevator. And thank goodness they already had all this booked for us, because nobody would have rented to us. The door shut, and it was mirrored. And we saw what we looked like for the first time, 10 days without a shower, and we stunk to high heaven. And Bill started laughing. He goes, oh my God, I don't even recognize us.
Holy cow.
We looked like just crap. I mean, we looked like something the dog wouldn't have brought in. So we go, and they said, we need to meet with you right now. And I said, no, I have not had a shower in 10 days. You people are going to wait. Give me 2 hours. So that was the best shower I ever felt in my life.
I'll bet. Holy cow.
We came back from after being debriefed, and when we opened the door to our room, the smell from all of our clothes and the camping stuff just came out the door. And Bill goes, oh God, that's what we smelled like. Those poor people on the plane, when our targets went back, from Amsterdam to, those poor people that had to sit by them. I feel bad for them.
Earth people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you was, did you have to notify the host country, because you're going in an undercover capacity to a foreign sovereign country?
Yeah.
And obviously you did.
We did. And we were told we could not carry weapons. Of course, he and I never carried the weapons on the undercover anyway, but we were pretty much told no weapons. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if we did have backup in the Netherlands, but they were a whole town away. They were 30 minutes away. So they weren't getting anywhere too fast if there had been emergency. We didn't know if this communication was even going to work. And they searched all of our stuff going into this camp. Everything, we were shook down. Everything was searched. So how we got a communication in was Bill had cut a hole in his boot, his hiking boot, put a little cell phone in there and Velcroed it together. And that's how we got a cell phone in. And then at night I would get under in the sleeping bag so that they couldn't see the light. And I would just text all clear or any information. Like if I did get a name, I'd text that to the case agent, because we had nothing to write on, nothing to record on. So, and we weren't wearing any kind of body wires there because we couldn't. One, I don't even think they would allow it. Mm-hmm. And no, Ireland wouldn't allow it, but the Dutch did, Netherlands did. So we actually did have a coffee mug with a recording device in it. So we did do some recording. But
how did you, how long was the school, this training?
It was 10 days. Well, it was 10 days.
How did you charge up your electronic devices?
We didn't use it. Like we turned it off during the day, and we only turned it on for a couple of minutes at night. And my, battery I had an extra battery for my coffee, and I'm trying to think how we even got that in. We had one extra battery for that. And then we knew once that was done, it was done. We had nothing else. There was no way to charge it. So we're very circumspect on when we used it. You only carried it when you kind of thought there could be something interesting talked about. So.
Holy cow.
Yeah. And there was no sense in like recording the sessions, because what was that going to do? So we didn't even record the sessions. I just tried to remember as much as I could, and then put that like in a 302, which is an investigative report, when we got back. So so it was very little recording being going on, because we didn't have any way to charge anything.
So you guys get back to LA, and it wasn't long after that before your identity's revealed.
Right.
And so at that point, do you put together a prosecution package, or what do you do?
Well, at that point, we turned everything over to the prosecutor, and that was it for us. There was a little bit of time once we got back. They actually did close the case, and I'm trying to remember why. They were closing the case. The title, or the group one, which is funded out of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. said, we're done. We need to move the money elsewhere, probably back to IT or wherever it was going. So they were closing the case. What happened was LA was a little nervous. So LA said, look, we've got these targets. These people are doing something. And so they wanted to keep it open as a group 2, which means their office would have to fund it. So they said, can you guys get by with, like, we actually had a storefront. We closing the storefront, cutting expenses. We'll keep your undercover apartment. We'll keep you living in that. So we said, yeah. It was the perfect timing because the economy was going to crap. And so we just said the store couldn't make it. We had to close the doors, that kind of stuff. And we kept going for a little while, working for LA. And that's when the identities were disclosed. And LA said, no, we can't take this chance leaving you here. You can't come to the FBI office because they always have us under surveillance. You can't go to any of the undercover spots because you'll blow the cover of our undercover spots. So we have no place for you. You're going to have to be transferred. So across the United States we went.
Were you concerned? I mean, they're teaching people how to build bombs. Were you guys concerned that they would blow up your undercover apartment?
That was always a thought because I always thought they would go after the car or something like that too. And so I was always worried our undercover car was going to be on fire in the parking lot. That's why people always say, when you do a book events, would you go back to California and do a book event? And I said, no, my rental car would be on fire before I got finished talking. No. I'll do them anywhere else, but I'm not going to poke the bear at this point. So it was always, that's how they operated. They would be more apt to blow up your car than like shoot you. So that was always a concern, I think, for the FBI too, is our safety.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that about going back, because Joe Pistone and I have gotten to be pretty good buddies, and we support a common conference every year, and have for several years now. And man, when you sit down and talk to somebody about war stories, I mean, I could just sit there. I'm in awe of this guy.
Yeah.
And I've met his wife and a couple of his daughters. I even met a granddaughter this past year. And first time you're talking to him, it's like, do you still feel like you're under threat? He's like, and Joe's not a big man. He's not real tall. But he's like, yeah. He said, I still go to New York. I just have to be a little careful. I'm like, you're going into New York City?
Yeah.
He said, yeah. And I'm like, this is the mafia. Joe, you realize who you were investigating, right? I mean, he did it for 6 years, so he knows. But you talk about poking the bear. That's just like daring them.
I know.
In my book.
See that. I stay away from the West Coast as far as that goes. I mean, I would never announce my presence. I love California and I love going back, to visit, but I would never announce my presence by any stretch.
I understand completely. There was a TV show I think Discovery did at one point. It's called Finding Escobar's Millions. And originally Javier and I were going to be the face of the show, and then we got into it. Ended up being a contract dispute with Discovery, but so they flew us down for 2 nights to do an introduction on the show.
Okay.
And and that was, the security restrictions were so tight, nobody could announce who we were, and this was after 9/11, so you couldn't book tickets in fake names. They had a security team with a bunch of former SAS guys from the UK, and I felt so comfortable with those guys.
Yeah.
But night we went and watched the Super Bowl in Hard Rock Cafe, Medellin. And the whole time you're in there, you're watching that door just to see who's coming in.
That's an uncomfortable feeling.
Oh, it is. So, so did they end up prosecuting people out of your case?
Some people got prosecuted. Most of them were in different places. Like the information we would pass to different areas, and they would develop cases from the information that we passed on. So there were some prosecutions, but our main people were never prosecuted.
All right. Well,
I know I've had a lot of people like contact me about like wanting to do a movie about this or a movie about that. And then when I say that, they're like, oh, so
it's not anticlimactic.
Yeah, it's very anticlimactic. And I'm like, that's the reality of undercover work, is a lot of it just goes to the wayside, especially with the FBI. It's a flavor of the month with the Bureau, man. You can be the hot flavor for a while, but then something else pops up. They're going to spend the money and move on, and you're old news.
Just and I don't want to waste my time with you, but I do want to cover this. Is what was the mental toll on you after this is all over? What did you experience, and how did you deal with it?
That's a great question, because people always say, well, why'd you write the books? And I think I wrote the books to actually show the toll that undercover work does take on an agent, because that's something that's not in television, movies, even books, that people write. But it's a huge toll, because the first time around I was completely by myself, and you spend a lot of time by yourself. Your brain starts thinking different things, like maybe these people are not as bad as everybody's making them out to be, that sort of thing. And then just being segregated from your family and friends. And then you don't know anything that's going on. And then you come back, and for me, I sort of resurfaced like 7 years later, because it was kind of 4 years and then 3 years almost ran together. There was a little time where I was off in the middle, but for the most part, they kind of ran together. And so a lot of people were like, where have you been for 7 years? You lose friends and family. Mm-hmm. And then also the other part of it is you really start thinking like your character. I mean, I was an anarchist for all this time. And I started thinking like an anarchist, because you have to think like your targets. So, and then the Bureau is usually really good about, when you've done an undercover, sending you back to our safeguard assessment unit, which are the people that make sure you're mentally stable. And I think all of that actually came about because of Joe Pistone. After he'd worked, he didn't have any of that when he was working the mafia. That came later because of his, the impact of the cases on him. We now have the safeguarding, where you'll sit with counselors and you'll talk, and they'll do all the testing to make sure that you're not going off the rails. And when you're actively working undercover, you have to do that every 6 months. Every 6 months, you're drugged back, and you talk to the counselors, and you make sure you're mentally okay and things like that. So because of the transfer, and it happened so fast, none of this took place. We didn't go back. We didn't go through safeguarding. It was like one day I was working undercover, the next day, bam, you're on a gang squad in Orlando, Florida. And at this point, I'm nearing 50 at this point, and all the guys in the squad are like early 30s. You're working 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And as you get older, this stuff just isn't as fun as when you're 20. And so I'm running around. And for the first time, I will say, for the first time in like 20 years of being in the Bureau, I had a supervisor I did not see eye to eye with. I did not get along with him. All my supervisors up to here I'd been really good with, but this guy, for some reason, he and I just graded each other wrong. And we didn't get along. And I was causing a little chaos on the squad. I didn't realize it at the time, but all these young men that were in their 30s who wanted to be undercovers were all looking up to me, and they were following me. And I was like thinking like an anarchist. So I'm saying anything that comes out of my mouth. And most of it, I will say, most of it could have probably got me fired, because I had no respect for authority, and it was coming across. So my supervisor calls me into his office one day, and he goes, all right, do you realize how many people you've put in jail over the years? And I said, no idea. And he goes, a lot. He said, do you know you've never been in trouble? You've never had anything against your record. I said, okay. And he says, the person in the file is not the person sitting in the chair. And you need to go find the person in the file, because the person sitting across from me right now is a criminal. You're thinking like a criminal. You're acting like a criminal. You're still in an undercover role. You have a badge and a gun, and that's a scary thing. And he says, so you need to think about it. So, of course, I left his office spewing all kinds of words that probably shouldn't be said on the podcast. And I got home and I thought, what if he's right? What if I came back broken? At this point, I'd done undercover work for about 13 years, and 7 of it, the full-time stuff. But off and on for about 13 years, I'd been the undercover person, because the Bureau doesn't have a lot of female undercovers. And I was single with no kids. So who do you go to when you need an undercover? You go to the single chick that has no kids, because they're going to say yes every time. So I'd done a lot of undercover work. And I thought, I think he might be right. I did not want to admit that to him, but in my mind, I knew that he was right. So I went back and I said, okay, I've done some soul searching, and there's a chance, small chance, that you might be maybe a little bit right. So he thought that was funny. And he goes, well, let's fix it. How can we fix it? What can you do? What can we do? How can I help you? And I thought about it for a while. I said, my husband had just retired at this point. He's like, he couldn't take it anymore. He came out of undercover, and they put him on like a white collar squad. He was bored out of his gourd. Healthcare fraud. That's what he was working. Oh. And he was already eligible. He looks at me. He goes, I can't take it. I can't take it. We had already bought the house in South Carolina. He goes, I'm retiring. Come when you can. Sorry. I still had another year. So I was like, oh, great. What am I going to do? So I went to my supervisor and I said, you know what? I want to go back to Quantico. And he goes, for what? What do you want to do there? I said, I want to go back as a counselor. And he says, nobody wants that job. We have to
Yeah.
make people take that job. I said, well, this is the perfect solution. The office doesn't have to cough up anybody. They don't have to send somebody who doesn't want to go. And I'm volunteering. I want to go. I want to go back to where it all started. I need to find myself and I need to find why I became an agent in the first place. And I think Quantico is the place to do it. So, man, the ink was not dry before I was out of the office. And he was like, sayonara. He was happy. Yeah, he was happy for me to leave. He could restore the office back to the squad, back to a normalcy. And it was the best thing that I ever did. It was, in fact, what I needed. I got back there and it's fidelity, bravery, integrity slapping you in the face at every turn. And like you had talked about, you know, these young agents, it gave me so much hope. I was passing the baton to the next generation of FBI. And I had to say, man, these were impressive people. I don't think I could get in the FBI at this stage. I really don't. I mean, their backgrounds were just astonishing, really sharp people. So I was there with one class and I had such a good time that I volunteered to do it again. So I actually kind of finished the career up at Quantico doing what I love best, which was brand new agents, taking them through from day one to graduation. And the last day when they're graduating, I'm crying with the mommies because it was like such a happy thing. And it was great. And so I think that's what saved me. I really do. I think going back to Quantico, that's a long way of saying that Quantico probably saved my job and my mentality. It really brought me around.
Thank God that supervisor you didn't really care for had the foresight to call you out.
Yeah.
It literally probably saved your life because that mental thing can take you down some dark holes that nobody wants to go in.
I know. I've talked to some undercovers who's retired who didn't get the help, I guess, and to the point that some of them have considered suicide. And I mean, there is such a dark element to undercover work, no matter what kind you work, whether you're doing the mafia, whether you're doing drugs, whether you're doing this kind of stuff. There's just a dark, lonely element of working undercover. And even with the quick hit stuff, where you're doing stuff and then you're done, you know, you're working for maybe 2 weeks and then you're done, you're working for a week and you're done. It's still, you're pulling yourself out of your skin. You're becoming somebody different for that length of time. And at one point I was doing so many short ones before I was doing the long-term stuff that I was in an airport and I had no idea who I was because I had so many aliases going at one time that I had to open up my wallet to see who I was on that particular day. And I didn't even know what airport I was in. And finally I saw Miami International. I was like, okay, I'm in Miami. But
wow,
that's when I kind of told myself, you might be doing too much undercover. If you're doing so much undercover, you don't know which alias you're using and where you're at. You know, you might need to stop.
Talk about a reality check. Huh?
Yeah. So, but it takes a real toll on you. And I do, I did not get along with that supervisor, but looking back, I'm grateful that he was kind enough to not like write me up. I mean, he could have written me up and caused a lot of problems for my last year or two on the job.
Yeah, and then you just end up being bitter, and that's not why I love my agency. I never wanted to retire from law enforcement, but good reason I did, and I think it's a good reason you did.
Yeah.
And how did you get into writing afterwards? Is that something you always like to do?
No, I was always a reader. From the time I was really little, I was a reader, and I would read like crazy. My mom was the one that kind of wanted the writer, and she was funny because she was okay with the undercover work, knowing that she wouldn't get to see me, but she never really knew what I did. And so the first book, I started writing the first book for my mom. I thought this would be fun. I'll write a book just for her. She'll get to read the story. This little new undercover FBI agent going off to California, and she'll get a kick out of this. So I wrote the first book, not realizing that it was therapy. I mean, I'm writing this stuff and I'm still working. It's my last year or so on the job when I'm working on it, and I'm writing, and it's therapy because I really come down on management in the FBI. In fact, my editor toned it down. She says, you've got an agenda against management. You don't like them much. She said, we're going to pull back on some of that. So it was therapy. I was putting it out there. I was putting it on the page and not even knowing it was therapy. So I
Mm-hmm.
wrote the first book, and I don't know what possessed me, but I entered it in a contest, a writing contest, and it won first place unpublished. It was just a manuscript at that point. And one of the judges came to me and he says, okay, I've heard this really ridiculous story that you just written this for your mother. And that's stupid. It's got to be published. You've got to find a publisher. This thing has got to be published. So
Wow.
I thought, okay. And so I did. And the first book came out, and the reviews are really good on it. A lot of like Kirkus reviews, a lot of really hardcore reviews that usually will pan books. In fact, they picked it as one of the best books for 2016. I was just kind of blown
Wow.
away. And then I always wanted to write a book about the Low Country. So that's how the second book came across. I wanted to make the Low Country kind of a character in the book. So I started working on Beyond the Cabin. And I had so much fun writing it. And I love talking to book clubs, and I love talking to people. And so that kind of opened up the whole book club circuit and book tour circuit. So I've really had fun. And then I thought I was kind of done, but then my husband came by one day and he says, you know what? How come I never made the books? All these other people made the books. I didn't make the books. And I said, oh, honey, you didn't know I'm working on a third book. And the third book is where you're going to be, because that one takes place in the Netherlands, and it has Lexi with a partner for the first time, a male partner. And it doesn't always go so smoothly. So that's where the third book came through, is from. And so they're all based on real cases, but they all are fictionalized. So
yeah. Yes. And are you writing a fourth book?
the fourth book's done, and with my literary agent, but it's not an FBI book. It's not law enforcement at all. It's kind of an adventure. It's set on the Appalachian Trail, and it's more of a book. It's about a group of childhood friends that come together in their 50s because of a tragedy, and they're hiking the trail, and they're all unloading baggage along the way. They all are there for the one girl, but they realize that along the way that by the time you're in your 50s, you've got to unload some of this baggage. So the trail is kind of just the means for them to be together and really unload a lot of the baggage along the way. So it was really a fun book to write, but it was so much harder than the FBI stuff. The FBI was so plot driven, and this one's
and that's what you know.
Yeah, and this one's so character driven that it was a really hard book to write compared to the Lexi books. So I'm going back to the FBI stuff, put it that way.
Well, you've been very successful at it.
Oh, thank you.
And just before we finish up here, is there any final thoughts, any a word of wisdom that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Well,
you've had a fantastic,
and I love my career. I do. I had moments post 9/11. I was so mad because the Bureau took all my money that I was thinking of joining Fish and Wildlife. And that's actually not even a joke. I applied with Fish and Wildlife, but I look back and I think, okay, it had some ups and downs. But I will tell anybody, especially if you're a young person and you're thinking of a job in federal law enforcement, I mean, it's a wild ride. It's fun. And there's so many options. I mean, like the U.S. Marshals, DEA, FBI, ATF, there's so many different kind of jobs you can do in federal law enforcement, but they're all, great. And with the Bureau, if you get tired of one offense, you just go work another one. I mean, we work like 300 violations. So that's the one good thing I think about the FBI is, you can work something for 10 years and say, I want something completely new. I want to switch gears and do it. And I think a lot of people think, well, I can't be a federal law enforcement officer and get married and have kids. And that's a fallacy too. I mean, you can. So if you're interested in law enforcement, I'd say go for it, but also be aware the drug requirements. Don't be out there in college doing everything under the sun.
That's what I tell people. I get a lot of emails and messages from people that have read the book or seen the show and all. And they're like, what words of wisdom would you have for me? You've inspired me to join federal law enforcement. Well, just be prepared. It's a lifestyle. This is not a 9-to-5, 40-hour-a-week job. And what you were doing is even much more involved and much more in depth than anything I ever did. I mean, we all have strong work ethics, and we put in the time that's required, and an 80-hour work week can become the norm.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. If you're going to do the job, if you take the job, be ready to do the job. And you got to have the right spouse that can tolerate that. Thank God I do. She met me when I was a city cop, and she's given up her job as a professional nurse multiple times to follow my career.
Right, right.
So you just got to have that special person. And you know, sounds like you lucked out pretty good there with your husband, and he knew, especially with his training as an undercover, he knew what to expect and what you were going through.
Yeah,
It's
he was really good. He's always been very supportive. And the fact that we could do an undercover assignment like that 24/7 and not kill each other, we figured
Mhm.
marriage was a cakewalk after that. So
And how long have you been married now?
well, let's see, we've been married 8 years. We've been together 18 because we dated 10 years, but we were doing all this undercover stuff. There was never time to get married. So
Yeah.
we dated 10 years and then we got married actually when we retired. So we've been married 8.5.
Well, and I just want to say here at the end that thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. This has been one of the most fun interviews I've done. I read Dana's book Beyond the Cabin, which is the second one. Loved it. I got it on Kindle because we kind of set this interview up quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't time enough for me to get a paperback and get the book read. I'm not the world's fastest reader, but your book, I'm not kidding you. Maybe it's because I know a lot about South Carolina. It just I picked it up, and started reading it. I think I read 60% of it the first time I sat down, and then the next day finished it. It just I have not, with all the authors we've had on here, I haven't bought a second book yet. Some of them will send them to me, but
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had the time to read them, and I'm looking forward to reading Below the Radar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
That's quite a compliment. But, you know, like I said,
well,
I'm in awe of your career too. Your career is unbelievable. I mean, you say that about mine, but you know, what you did, I mean, it defies words. It's just
uh,
incredible.
thank you for saying that. I'll send you a check in the mail for saying nice things about me. But where can we find your books at?
Well, they can be ordered by any local bookstore, any independent bookstore, because they're all traditionally distributed, or they're on Amazon and they're on ebook, paperback, or audiobook too. So if you're an audiobook person, I have the same narrator that did all 3 books. So Lexi will have the
Excellent.
same voice. So any place that has books can order books. So yeah, or
Excellent.
Amazon or Barnes and Noble, all the big ones have them.
So, and if you want to find out more about Lexi, I started calling you Lexi. That's your character in the book. If you want to find out more about Dana, go to her website, Dana, Dana Ridenour, RIDENOUR.net.
That's correct.
She's got a lot of cool stuff on there. It talks about places she's been, where she's going. You can read synopsis on the book. Gorgeous lady. She dedicated her life as well as her husband to serving the public. And you've heard me say before, being a public servant is not a derogatory term in my book. It's a heroic term. And you just heard the crap that she went through and the dedication she showed to people who deserved her attention, and it was for people who she doesn't know. You'll probably never meet her personally, but she was doing it for all of us. So Dana, God bless you. Thank you so much for what you did for our country, for being you probably won't agree to this, but in my book, you're a patriot. And thank you for coming on the Game of Crimes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. If you'll stick around just a minute, and for all our listeners, stand by for the debrief. Well, hey, gang, man, I got to say, talking with Dana was one of the best times I've ever had here on Game of Crimes. You know, I think you could tell from her story that her life was really an open book, a book full of danger and daring do, wasn't it? Before we started this recording, I asked if there were any topics off limits. You know what Dana's response was? My life's pretty much an open book. Ask me anything, even to the point of telling us just how handsome all of us DEA agents are. And of course, she's right. I got to tell you, I really love that part. I'm sure you Bureau guys out there thinking, you suck. That's okay. All right. As you already know, being a law enforcement professional anywhere, regardless of what agency you work for, is dangerous and challenging. Absolutely. For me, that's what made my life exciting. But what possesses a small town girl at all of 5'3" tall, who already has a ton of excitement in her life working on narcotics cases, violent crimes, and in the sex trafficking business from the investigative side? What makes her want to become a deep cover agent, potentially infiltrating some of the most violent crime groups in the world? You know what I'm talking about. Those groups that promote anarchy and chaos. And don't forget, she's out there on her own most of the time with backup being, oh, I don't know, 20 minutes away or nowhere. Holy cow. Who's to say if backup's even available? Now, listen to this. It's hard to say. For her own safety, she didn't carry a weapon. Wait, does that even make sense? But you know what? The way she explained it, it made perfect sense. But it just doesn't sound right, does it? You're going in harm's way and no weapon. Now, Dana's first undercover assignment was to infiltrate the Earth Liberation Front, or ELF. And her second undercover assignment was infiltrating the Animal Liberation Front, ALF. Really? Elf and Alf? No wonder they got upset when anyone called them by those acronyms. Sounds like the geniuses didn't think that one all the way through. You know, if I was the prosecutor on these cases, I'd take every opportunity in open court to call them Elf and Alf. But hey, that's just me. During the Alf investigation, Dana and her undercover partner, aka future husband, traveled to the Netherlands to participate in a training camp to learn how to construct incendiary devices, along with how to cause maximum disruption and destruction of whoever they decide is their enemy. Sounds like a great vacation, doesn't it? I've been to that area, including Amsterdam, and it's beautiful over there. You know, the thought of holding training camps in such a beautiful country, that just doesn't sound right. I mean, they're all about destruction and violence. But honestly, I'd love to have seen Dana and future husband when they arrived at that hotel in The Hague to brief the local police about these anarchist groups. 10 days with no shower, very little, if any, hygiene, and limited clean clothing. Can you imagine how rough they must have looked and smelled? Whew. I'm just glad I wasn't on that plane with the other wackos on the flights back to Los Angeles. Mm-mm-mm. You know, this all sounds exciting and a little bit funny, but there was one thing Dana told us about that really bothered me, and that's when the FBI headquarters gave up information from an undercover investigation based on a Freedom of Information Act request, what we commonly refer to as a FOIA request, FOIA, okay? Although it put her life in jeopardy, well, you saw Dana, she took it all in stride. She wasn't happy about it, having to give up all that work she put into the the undercover investigation and the emergency transfer to Orlando for her own safety. Her own safety. I know what she was talking about when she explained that it was probably a GS6 or a GS7 employee who worked on that request, saw the case had been closed for a few years, and thought, well, it's okay to fill out this FOIA request, and we don't need to redact any of this information. The case is closed. It's tied to an undercover role. That's why all federal agencies have offices of chief counsel, also known as our attorneys. And as big as the FBI is, I certainly would think they had attorneys assigned to the FOIA section who review everything before it goes outside of their agency. I mean, that's just common sense, right? If they did have attorneys assigned to FOIA, they obviously didn't do their job that day. Going into a deep cover assignment is one of the, if not the most dangerous assignments a cop can do. Every safeguard should be employed to protect those brave souls who go beyond by putting themselves in harm's way, even more so than you regularly do. Heck, they're putting their heads inside the proverbial lion's mouth. The identity of the undercover agent, in this case Dana, was not revealed. But as she told us, the information included those reports that came from a single source, her. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon to figure out who that source was. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think the safety of the undercover agent should be paramount, even to the point of not disclosing those undercover activities ever. Whew, man. Okay, let's move on. We heard Dana talk about how working long periods of time in an undercover capacity started to play with her mind. On a daily basis, while taking a shower, she went over her legend. That's her undercover story, repeating her undercover name, her date of birth, her social security number, her mom and dad's names, her siblings, her past employment, past places lived and worked. All the things that you need to have that background information so that when they check you out, it looks legit. She's doing this ad nauseum, but it keeps her prepared and it keeps her alive. But hanging out with the bad guys on a daily basis hanging out with the bad guys on a daily basis for extended periods of time results in relationships with those people, good and bad. Yeah, they're still the bad guys in our eyes, But human nature plays a role in finding things in common, things that you like that other people like. It just stands to reason that all this can cloud a person's true identity, especially over an extended amount of time, 3 years, 4 years at a time. And believe it or not, all of those bad guys, well, the ones you're investigating, occasionally one of them might not really be that bad after all. I don't know. Maybe they thought they were joining a legitimate group to try and make a positive change. Maybe they had the intentions of helping to save our earth and our animals. And maybe they didn't do enough homework on these groups before they joined. Once they were in the group, they couldn't figure out a way to get out. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they developed friendships and really cared about those friends to the point that they didn't want to leave them behind. I'm sure there are multiple reasons they can come up with not to leave the group, even knowing it's not the best thing in their interest to stay. But this can also hold true for the undercover agent. One of the sayings in Dana's book that stuck with me, you become an undercover agent, quote, to build relationships so you can betray those relationships. That says it all right there. And it's not always an easy thing to do, even for an experienced law enforcement professional. That's what happened to Dana. By her own accounts, when she left the undercover world and went back to a regular FBI office, her mindset was completely different than when she joined the bureau. And I think that's very understandable. She was defensive to the point of openly speaking her mind, regardless of who she was talking to or who she offended. While that might seem like a good trait to have for some, which I'd like to have sometimes, the truth is it creates a very caustic environment, a place where people become mistrustful of each other, a place where everyone thinks it's okay to be a loner and do what you think is right rather than utilizing that team concept where you're looking out for each other. And that is absolutely necessary in the law enforcement realm. Although Dana didn't care for her new boss in Orlando, I had to give him a little credit. He had the foresight to see what was going on, and he called Dana on the carpet for her attitude and her actions. And just thank God, Dana was smart enough to consider what her boss said. She went home, she thought about it, and she realized that he was right. And sometimes that's hard to say, isn't it? She did need to change. And how did she make the change? She asked for an assignment that and trust me, very few people asked for. She volunteered to be a counselor for new trainees at the FBI Academy. We have the same thing in the DEA. Counselors are supposed to be seasoned agents who know how to make successful cases and can train these newbies to do the same. In reality, a counselor becomes an adult babysitter much of the time. A counselor moves to the academy to work and live amongst the trainees. You're not doing that remote. You're there with them every day and every night, every weekend. It's one of the most important assignments in any law enforcement agency, but sacrifice comes along with the assignment, just like it does on the street, just like it does working undercover. But as we all heard, being a counselor in the FBI Academy was exactly what Dana needed to help bring her back to reality. The world where she wanted to do good, where she wanted to help and protect others, a world where she could function without a jaded opinion. Good choice, girl. When I was getting close to retirement age, which in federal law enforcement is 57 years old, I used to ask some of my retired friends, how did you know when it was time to retire? When did you know when it was time to go? You know what they said? Every single one of them told me, Murph, when it's time to go, you'll know. Afterwards, I thought to myself, that didn't help me a damn bit. What the heck does that mean? When it's time to go, you'll know. But you know what? They were right. I knew when it was time. Dana's partner, future husband, who was actually her real husband by this time, he knew when it was time to go. And after Dana had spent time at the academy working with new agent trainees, seeing their excitement about what they're getting themselves into, she knew it was time to go also. To Dana, to her husband, Bill, thank you both for the service you provided our country. Remember, everyone, Bill was working undercover also, taking those same life-threatening risks as Dana. I take my hat off to both of you and say, God bless, job well done. And may, as we say every week, may God bless all the members of law enforcement, our military, and all of our first responders. Now, following retirement, Dana began writing fiction books, but in many cases, her stories were based on her real-life events. She created a character named Lexi Montgomery. This is a person you need to meet in writing. Lexi Montgomery is a female FBI agent who worked long-term undercover assignments, just like Dana. Sounds familiar, huh? Currently, Dana has a 3-book series out about Lexi's adventures. The books are called, the first one is Behind the Mask, the second is Behind the Cabin, and the third is Below the Radar. Now, I read the second book, Beyond the Cabin, and you heard me say I loved it. It's a real easy read. By that, I mean she didn't use too many big words that I'd have to look up because you know what my educational background is. But seriously, if you're interested in an inside of look at what working deep cover might be like, you got to read Dana's books. You can find them on Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, and other booksellers, and on the Game of Crimes website under book list. And I include a link on there as well. Okay. Now go over and check out Dana's website to learn more about her. And that website is Dana, Dana, Ridenour, RIDENOUR.net. You can also follow her on Instagram at Undercover Author, on Facebook at Dana Ridenour Writer page, and on LinkedIn at Dana Ridenour. Dana, one last thank you for coming on the Game of Crimes podcast and sharing your adventures. It was a true honor to have you on here, sister, and I mean that in the most sincerest way. So if you liked this week's episodes, go to Apple or Spotify and hit those 5 stars for me. It only takes you a few minutes, and it really helps support the show. And on YouTube, click on that subscribe button and the like button. And I'm trying to grow those subscribers, so I really appreciate you going over and doing that. Send me your comments on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or to my email address, which is gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com. My website is gameofcrimespodcast.com, where you'll find all of our episodes, our book lists, some merchandise, and some other good things on there. On Facebook and Instagram, go to Game of Crimes Podcast, and on X, type in Game of Crimes. Also on Facebook, and this is important, go to the Game of Crimes fans and join the best private group on the Facebook platform. The group is run by our favorite mafia queen, Sandy Salvato, but watch out. She rules with an iron fist, but she wears a velvet glove. It's a lot of fun. And if you're looking for even more content, go to patreon.com/Game of Crimes and sign up. Give me a chance over there. I have several monthly episodes that range from silly to serious, but just come on over and see what it's all about. I think you'll enjoy it. Just give me a chance. Tell your friends about Game of Crimes, invite them to come over and check out the show. I truly appreciate you helping me spread the word about the best weekly true crime podcast available. Your support, that's what keeps me going. Remember, we can have different ideas and different opinions, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to be friends. So finally, thanks for joining me to play the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes. I'll see y'all next week.